Flex Talk for the week of July 27th, 2026. Today we're going to talk about frame scaffold safety awareness, but first we got a couple things to go over. Again, I went over this last week. Stretch and Flex program. You guys should have or will be getting these cards to put in your trailers or on your job sites. Listen, these got to be done every morning for everybody. About 70% of all accidents on job sites are soft tissue accidents. So this isn't going away, like I said before. So take the 5 minutes with everybody and just go through these stretches. Need it done. Okay. Well, there's that. The other thing is respirator exams. There's still probably a dozen of you guys out there that need respirator exams. Jen sent out letters, sometimes multiple letters to some of you. Those also need to get taken care of as soon as possible. So if you're unclear of where to go, ask your superintendent. They can get with me and we'll give you that information on where you're going to go get those physical exams and pulmonary function tests. All right.
All right.
So that's it for that. We'll get into the PowerPoint here. Okay. All righty. Okay, so today, scaffolds and construction. This session provides basic hazard awareness and safe work practices for workers who use scaffolds to safely perform construction, repair, and maintenance work on structures, and for workers who erect, maintain, and disassemble scaffolds. The course covers practices and control measures to protect workers from scaffold-related injuries. Note that this session does not apply or cover permanent work platforms, aerial lifts, scissor lifts, or lifts suspended from cranes or derricks. So this is just frame scaffold, guys, straight up frames. All right. At the completion of this module, you'll be able to recognize falling objects, electrical and unsafe work conditions, identify basic types of scaffolds and safety features of each, including load carrying capacities, describe fall protection, falling object protection, electrical safety, and other procedures to control common hazards. And then explain where ladders are allowable or prohibited. So there are several recognized hazards common to all types of scaffolds that result in serious and disabling injuries, and in some cases death. In almost all cases, they can be avoided by following the safe work practice covered in this training and the site-specific training and practices at your workplace. We'll talk about those hazards now and then discuss measures you can take to control your exposure to them. Falls off the scaffold because of an inadequate or missing guardrails and planking are a leading cause of disabling injuries and even death. Falling objects like tools, debris, building materials like brick and stone, and equipment from scaffold platforms striking workers below is another leading cause of injuries. Unstable or overloaded scaffolds are prone to collapse, bringing workers down with them. Live power lines and electrical wires too close to a scaffold cause shock and electrocution to workers on the scaffold. And then weather such as rain, ice, and snow causes slippery surfaces on scaffolds and leads to injuries from slips and falls. Unattended tools, debris, and materials become slip and trip hazards when they are left on the platform floor or otherwise interfere with your movements. Okay, the hazards of working on scaffolds are compounded by certain poor conditions and work practices that increase the risk of injuries while working on a scaffold. The average scaffold-related injury to a worker costs $20,000 in lost wages and productivity. That's according to the Federal Occupational Health and Health Administration, or OSHA. Injury statistics, a loose plank, a plank slippage, or a scaffold support that gives way is a common factor that leads to disabling falls. The lack of toe boards, screening debris nets, or catch platforms to prevent tools and other objects left on the platform from being inadvertently kicked off dramatically increases the risk they will strike workers below. Faulty guardrails or no guardrails at all present obvious falling hazards. OSHA reports that in a third of scaffold-related incidents involving fall injuries, the platform did not have a proper guardrail. And then personal fall arrest systems that are inadequate or not present when required can lead to severe injuries or death. 1 out of every 4 workers who install and use scaffolds do not have proper safety training. According to OSHA, such training should include safety requirements for installing work platforms, disassembling or assembling and inspecting scaffolds, and safe practices for working on scaffolds. All right, so different types, common types. Scaffold is an elevated temporary work platform that supports workers and materials at height and provides access to places that would otherwise be difficult or impossible to reach and work on safely, such as chimneys, bridges, ceilings, and the facing of tall buildings. There are two basic types of scaffolds that are regulated by OSHA, with many variations in safety features for each type. So supported scaffolds are made up of one or more platforms, often one above the other, supported at the base by rigid members like poles, frames, legs, outriggers, and other means of securing them that can sustain heavy loads. Examples include the commonly used fabricated frame scaffolds, mobile scaffolds set on wheels or casters, pump and ladder jacks, a tube and coupler, and mast climbers used at greater heights. Suspended scaffolds are made up of one or more platforms suspended from an overhead structure by ropes or other rigid apparatus. Examples are single point adjusted scaffold with a platform suspended by one rope, such as a bosun's chair, a two-point swing stage scaffold with a platform suspended by two ropes connected to hangers or stirrups at each end of the platform, a float scaffold, a multi-level adjustable scaffold with a series of platforms resting on common hangers or stirrups, and then scissor lifts and aerial lifts are regulated by OSHA as supported scaffolds and have their own safety features unique to them and are discussed in other training courses. So yeah, we're just talking about the main types of scaffold here. Right. This course focuses on the safety-related responsibilities and actions of workers who use scaffolds for construction, repair, and maintenance of work on structures. These workers often cooperate with several other types of workers, trying to carry out responsibilities for the safety of workers under OSHA rules. Scaffold users are those whose work requires them to be supported by scaffolds to access the areas of a structure and perform work on it. Others include painters, carpenters, bricklayers, and laborers. Users do not erect or dismantle scaffold unless they are specifically trained to safely perform those tasks by the competent person. Scaffold erectors and dismantlers assemble scaffold before other work can begin, inspect, repair, and maintain the condition of the scaffold, and then disassemble it after that work has been completed. In many cases, that is their primary job, but erectors and dismantlers can also be users as long as they are trained to safely perform all their assigned tasks. A qualified person designs a scaffold for the job and directs the work of scaffold users, as well as trains scaffold users on the nature of electrical hazards, fall hazards, and falling object hazards. The person is someone who, by possession of a recognized degree, certificate, or professional standing, or by extensive knowledge, training, and experience, has successfully demonstrated the ability to solve or resolve problems related to the subject matter, the work, or the project. So that's qualified person. Now, a competent person identifies hazards, working conditions, and has authorization to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them, as well as directs the work of erectors and dismantlers and trains them on the nature of scaffold hazards. A competent person can also perform the work of a qualified person if he or she has the credentials, training, knowledge, and experience. Okay, there are safety requirements common to all supported scaffolds for installing and maintaining them in working condition. They must be secured to the building to prevent movement. Each tier must be placed with stacking pins or couplings and locked if uplift can occur. Legs on bases must be placed on firm foundations such as base plates, mud sills, or concrete slabs. Each scaffold tier must be cross-braced and fully guardrailed are required at the 10-foot level. All right, guys, so the 10-foot level for scaffold, yes, but OSHA also requires fall protection, anything above 6 feet. So it doesn't matter if you guys are building scaffold and you get to that 6-foot level, it has to have guardrails. It doesn't, the 10-foot thing, that's not a thing. Don't go by 10 foot, always go by 6 foot. All right, welded frame scaffolds are very common at construction sites, so they serve as a good example to use to explain the safety features of supported scaffolds. Footings must be able to support a loaded scaffold without settlement or displacement. Unstable objects should not be used for support construction equipment, such as forklifts, and fork end loaders cannot be used to support scaffolds. So you need base plates, is what they're saying. You need firm level surface. So whether that's compacted gravel, whether that's pavement, blacktop, concrete, whatever it is, you need that, plus you need the sill plates, all right? The scaffold uprights include poles and frames, must be plumb and braced to prevent swaying. Guys, ties, and braces must be installed to prevent tipping. This means every 20 feet vertically for scaffolds that are 3 foot wide or less, and every 26 feet vertically for scaffolds that are more than 3 feet wide. So our scaffolds are typically, 5 foot wide. They could be in the 3 foot range, like even with a Baker scaffold, if you're going a couple tiers up, a lot of times it's a good idea to tie that in. That needs to be discussed, with me, your superintendent, before you guys go ahead and use multi-tier Baker frames because they're very unstable due to their small footprint. Finally, supported scaffolds with a height to base ratio greater than 4:1 must be tied to the structure with guys, ties, and braces to prevent tipping. The guys, ties, and braces should be installed according to the manufacturer's recommendations. Okay, another common type of support scaffold, is the mobile or rolling scaffold set on wheels or casters, which is used when workers have to move or change position frequently in relation to a structure. It must be installed and maintained according to the following OSHA requirements. The height of the mobile scaffold must not exceed 2 times the minimum base width unless it's designed and constructed to exceed stability test requirements for a greater height. For example, a scaffold that is 3 feet wide cannot be more than 6 feet high. It must be fully planked with the platform secured. Never ride on a mobile scaffold unless certain specific conditions exist, which are relatively uncommon. So that means no riding on the scaffold, no pushing guys around on the scaffold. The scaffold must always be locked in place when in use. Additional requirements for mobile or rolling scaffolds include the casters must be able to withstand 4 times the load of the scaffold with positive locking devices. Each tier of the scaffold must be fully braced. The platform must have full guardrails if it is, no, not 10, 6 feet or more off the ground. Power systems used for moving rolling scaffolds must be designed for that purpose. Platforms of rolling scaffolds must not extend beyond the base supports. Finally, scaffolds must be leveled using screw jacks or the equivalent. So going back there, they say platforms of rolling scaffold must not exceed beyond the base supports. So that means on rolling towers, guys, you can't have like an outrigger where you have just a deck on the inboard side against the wall because that's outside of that base. So when you're using a rolling tower, you have to be fully enclosed and within the base dimensions of that scaffold, so nothing outside of that. All right, there are common unique features of suspended scaffold compared with support scaffolds that we'll cover now. 2-point suspension scaffold is a common type of suspension scaffold and must meet the following OSHA requirements for when installed. Inspect the scaffold before installation and during use. Specifically, a competent person must evaluate it and confirm that the supporting surface, direct connections, outrigger beams, counterweights, and tiebacks are installed correctly and are capable of supporting the scaffold. Roof irons or hooks must be secured and installed and anchored. Suspension ropes must be able to handle 6 times the rated load of the scaffold. The ropes may be wire, synthetic, or fabric. Finally, the platform must not be more than 36 inches wide or less than 20 inches wide. All right, so that's for swing stages. Here's some general requirements for suspension scaffolds. The support device must rest on a surface that can support 4 times the scaffold load. Support devices include outrigger beams, cornice hooks, parapet clamps, or similar devices. The inboard ends of the outrigger must be bolted or otherwise connected to the structure, or the ends must be supported by counterweights. Only items that are specifically intended to be used as counterweights can be used. Do not use construction materials such as bags of sand or cement, roofing felt, or bricks. The strength of tiebacks must be equal to the strength of the suspension rope. Tiebacks can be used to secure outrigger beams or other support devices such as cornice hooks, which we're not going to use. Roof hooks, roof irons, or parapet clamps. Tiebacks must be anchored to a structurally sound anchor point. This does not include pipes, vents, or electrical conduits. It's got to be a structural element, guys, and we got to just confirm that it's able to support that load and the force. The platform must be secured to prevent swaying. Additional requirements for suspension scaffold include each suspension rope and connection hardware must be able to support 6 times the maximum load of the scaffold. Wire ropes used for suspension must be inspected before each work shift for kinks, bends, or other physical damage such as flattening, broken wires in the strands, and abrasion, corrosion, or heat damage caused by torches or contact with electrical wires. If there are signs of these kinds of damage, the suspension must be replaced. Repaired wire ropes cannot be used for suspension. Finally, suspension scaffolds must have emergency or automatic braking devices in addition to normal operating brakes. The emergency brake engages automatically when an uncontrolled movement occurs, such as a rapid change in momentum. All right, so we'll now turn to some of the specific safety requirements for scaffolds, including the design of the scaffold components and safe work practices. Scaffold capacity is fundamental to safety. Each scaffold and all of its components, including supporting structures, must be designed by a qualified person who will calculate the loads for which it is intended. Any scaffold must be able to support its own weight plus at least 4 times the maximum intended load. And all the suspended support devices must be placed on a surface that can support at least 4 times the load put on them by the scaffold. This includes the total weight of all persons, equipment, tools, materials, and any other load that is reasonably expected to be applied to the scaffold and its components at any one time. Each rope and connection hardware on suspension scaffolds must be able to support at least 6 times the maximum intended load applied to the rope. The scaffold must be constructed and loaded according to the design criteria. All right, so you must have safe access to the scaffold and scaffold platforms. A specific means of access is required for many types of platforms, with a ladder, stairway, ramp, walkway, or another scaffold. Use a ladder or steps or some other means of access for platforms that are more than 2 feet above or below the point of access. In other words, it is not permissible to climb up or jump down to a platform that is more than 2 feet above or below you. That's important, guys. That's an easy one that gets overlooked. If you got to step up more than 2 feet to get on a scaffold or off a scaffold, we need some different measure getting down. So that's going to be a secured ladder. That can be stairs, what have you, but it's got to be there, anything over 2 feet. Climbing cross braces is not an acceptable form of access. Doing so creates a potential for tipping the platform, causing damage of the braces or falling. Always use proper forms of access to the scaffolds. Hook-on ladders can be used as long as they are designed for that type of scaffold. They must be positioned so that they cannot tip over the scaffold. Stairways and stair towers must have slip-resistant steps and platforms. They must also have railings and landing platforms at each level. Incline ramps and walkways cannot be sloped more than a ratio of 1 vertical to 3 horizontal. If the slope is steeper than 1 to 8, cleats must be fastened to the planks to provide better footing. Ramps and walkways that are 4 feet or more above a lower level must also have guardrails. All right, here are some general points about platform construction. Working platforms on scaffolds must be fully planked between the front uprights and the guardrail supports. The space between the platform and the uprights, as well as the space between platforms that are next to each other, cannot be more than 1 inch. So gaps more than 1 inch are no good. Most platforms, with rare exceptions, must be at least 18 inches wide. The front edge of the platform must be no more than 14 inches from the face of the work, unless there are guardrail systems built along the front edge, or you are using a personal fall arrest system. We'll talk about fall arrest systems shortly. The ends of the platform must extend at least 6 inches over the center line of the support, unless the platform is restrained with hooks or similar methods. A cantilevered portion of the platform that hangs over the end support must be supported or guarded. Either they must be designed to support the load without tipping, or they must be guardrails that prevent anything from being placed on the cantilevered portion. If the end is not supported or guarded, the cantilevered portion cannot exceed 12 inches for a platform that is 10 feet long or less, and cannot exceed 18 inches of a platform that is more than 10 feet long. All right, long platforms have additional safety requirements. Generally, abutted platform ends must rest on separate supports. However, common supports may be used on platforms that are specifically designed in this way, or that have hooks or provide common supports. For planks that are overlapped, they must be overlapped over a support. In addition, the overlap must be at least 12 inches or be secured by nailing the planks together or other means. If the planks turns a corner, The overlap planks that is not at the right angle to the support must be laid down first and go under the plank that is at a right angle to the support. Okay, here are some important points about platform components. Wood platforms must not be painted. The idea here is that paint might hide defects in the wood. The platform may be coated with wood preservatives or slip-resistant finishes as long as the covering doesn't hide the top or bottom wood surfaces. The ends of the platform may be painted for the purpose of marking or identification. The components of the scaffold should not be mixed with components from another manufacturer's scaffold unless a qualified person determines that the resulting structure is sound. Scaffold components should not be modified to make them mix with other types of scaffold systems. Finally, components made of dissimilar metals should not be used together. The reason that is that dissimilar metals could result in galvanic action that could reduce the strength of the metal components. So they're talking about aluminum, to steel components there. All right, some forms of fall protection, and in some cases, more than one form is required by OSHA regulation for all scaffold systems with workers on platforms above a certain height. Fall protection for scaffolds typically means guardrail systems and personal fall arrest systems. Fall protection is required whenever the work occurring 10 feet or more above the ground, 6 feet above the ground, guys. Lower levels include the ground, floor, roofs, pits, tanks, materials, waters, or equipment. It is an industrial best practice and mandatory in some states to require fall protection at any height when working above dangerous equipment, for example, where there is an impalement hazard or there are machines with moving parts. Always use personal fall arrest systems when working from bosun chairs, catenary cranes, a float, a needle beam, or a ladder jack scaffold. Because these guardrails are impractical. The fall arrest system is required when guardrails are inadequate or impractical to provide adequate protection from falls from a scaffold. Guardrail systems are required or walkways that are included as part of the scaffold system, as well as for open sides and open ends of platforms. So all sides need to have fall protection. Single point and 2-point adjustable suspension scaffolds require both guardrails and personal fall arrest systems. So that's swing stages. So, you have your guardrail system, and you also have your lifelines. Ladder jacks are highly popular type of scaffold in the construction industry. And personal fall arrest systems don't prevent a fall from happening, but they do stop a fall in progress. They consist of a body harness, an anchorage, and a connector such as a lanyard, lifeline, or deceleration device. We'll talk about safe best practices for setting up and using fall arrest to prevent injury on scaffolds. So vertical lifelines, when used, must be fixed to an anchor point that is independent of the scaffold. The lifeline must be protected from sharp edges and possible abrasion. Anchor points can be structural components of the building, but not piping, vents, outrigger beams, or counterweights. Vertical lifelines must not be anchored to the same point as the suspension rope or the safety of the scaffold suspension ropes or supported lines themselves. Horizontal lifelines, when used, must be anchored to 2 or more structural members of the scaffold. When used on a suspension scaffold, a lifeline may also be attached to both suspension lines above the hoist and the brake attached to the end of the scaffold. However, horizontal lifelines may not be attached only to the suspension ropes. Suspension scaffolds must be equipped with additional support lines and automatic brakes if lanyards are connected to the structural members. The purpose of this requirement is to maintain the ability to stop a fall even if one of the suspension rope fails. Anchor points and lifelines must be capable of supporting at least 5,000 pounds of force. Body belts or waist belts are not an acceptable form of personal fall arrest systems under OSHA fall protection rules. So you got to have a full body harness, that's what they're saying. As we said earlier, guardrail systems are required for walkways more than 6 feet above a lower level or at any height above dangerous equipment that are included as part of the scaffold system. Guardrails must be installed along all open sides and open ends of scaffold platforms. Guardrails must be in place before the scaffold is released for use for employees other than those who are actually erecting or dismantling the scaffold. A top height of a guardrail must be between 38 and 45 inches. So 42 inches is the standard height. The top rail may be higher than 45 inches only if there is more than one mid-rail and none of the resulting spaces are more than 19 inches. The top rails must be capable of withstanding 200 pounds of force downward or horizontally at any point. However, top rails of suspension scaffolds are required to withstand only 100 pounds of force. More requirements for guardrails include the following. Guardrails, when they're used, must be installed between the top rail and platform. Approximately halfway between the two screens, mesh and solid panels may be used instead of mid rails. They must extend from the top edge of the top rails down to the platform and along any openings between supports. Mid-rail systems must be able to withstand 150 pounds of horizontal or downward force. However, mid-rails on suspension scaffolds need to only withstand 75 pounds of force. Cross braces may be used for instead of top rails or mid rails, provided that they do not allow openings more than 19 inches at any point. Finally, guardrails must not present a puncture or laceration hazard. They should be free of burrs or snags that could catch an employee's clothing. The ends of the rails should not overhang the end posts unless they are sure that there is no projection hazard. And as we discussed earlier, objects on a platform that fall and strike workers below are a leading cause of injuries. There are two categories of falling objects, which specific safety measures for each one, with specific safety measures for each one. Small objects like hand tools and construction debris, and larger objects like a compressor, a pipe, or stone-facing material. Always wear a hard hat when working on or under a scaffold. Barricade the areas below the scaffold if toe boards or screens are not sufficient to prevent objects or equipment from falling off a platform. No one is allowed to enter a barricaded area. If barricades are not erected under scaffold to prevent someone from entering the falling object hazard zone, use toe boards on scaffold platforms to prevent small objects like hand tools and debris from falling off. Toe boards must be installed on the open edges of a distance long enough to prevent objects from being kicked off or fall from the platform onto workers below. Toe boards must be at least 3.5 inches high. When small objects or materials are stacked close to and higher than the toe board, there are additional falling object protection structures to install. On the same level as the platform, use screens or panels that extend from the toe board to the top rail of a guardrail system that contains small items. In lieu of same level falling object protection, installers can erect canopies, debris nets, or catch platforms above the workers to allow lower levels so long as they are strong enough to withstand the impact of the falling objects. When objects like pipes or stone are too large or heavy for the falling object safety measures, they must be placed away from the edge of the platform or surfaces secure to the fasten to prevent them from falling. All right, I see it a lot on scaffolds where we're stacking brick up on the edge of the scaffold. You can't just stack brick higher than that toe board is what they're saying. You're going to have additional like securement. Like it could be like a sheet of plywood that's attached to the top rail only for that section where you're storing it. The bottom line is you got to make sure that nothing's going to be able to get kicked off or dislodged and fall down the side of the frame. As we said earlier, electric shock and electrocution cause severe and disabling injuries while working on a scaffold. Stay clear of power lines and wet power cords. Never work on a scaffold that is erected so close to a live power line that you could come in contact with it. There are mandatory safe distances for scaffold from electric power lines. All scaffolds must be 10 feet or more away from all uninsulated power lines and lines that carry 300 volts or more, and at least 3 feet away from insulated power lines less than 300 volts. It is a good safe practice to keep the scaffold 10 feet away from any power line. There are situations when a scaffold can be erected closer than 10 feet from a power line, such as when the electric utility shuts off the power, but always talk to the competent person about the safe operating distance from power lines near your work on scaffold before you start. Make sure power outlets and portable power equipment plugs are dry before plugging into power, especially in wet weather. All right, now let's talk about several additional safe work practices that apply to all scaffolds. Scaffolds must be erected, dismantled, and altered only under the supervision of a competent person who is qualified for these tasks. The competent person must select experienced and trained employees for these jobs. If it is your assigned responsibility, inspect scaffolds before each work shift or after any occurrence that might affect the integrity of the structure. Only a person who is qualified to do so may conduct the inspection. Replace or repair any damaged or weakened scaffold components immediately, or report any damage so that the repairs can be made before someone is injured. The scaffold may be removed from service until the component is repaired or replaced if the competent person or qualified person makes that determination. As already mentioned, but worth repeating, Keep scaffolds away from energized power lines and be extra vigilant about it when moving a mobile scaffold. Conductive material on scaffolds such as metal present a serious hazard. The scaffold must be at least 3 feet from a power line or less than 300 volts and at least 10 feet away from a power line or greater than 300 volts. And it's a best practice to stay 10 feet or more in general. Okay, page 3000. Do not load scaffolds beyond their rated capacities or beyond their maximum intended loads. Do not move scaffolds horizontally while you or others are on them, unless a professional engineer has designed them for such movement or they are considered to be mobile scaffolds that are intended to be used in this way. Do not work on scaffolds that are covered with snow or ice or slippery materials unless the purpose is to remove the slippery materials. Do not work on scaffolds during storms or high winds unless a competent person has determined that it's safe to do so and you are protected with a personal fall arrest system or a windscreen. Windscreens can only be used only if the suspended scaffold is secured against the expected wind forces. Debris should not be allowed to accumulate on platforms, levels. Leaves, paper, materials, and tools can become a slip hazard. Never use makeshift devices like buckets, step ladder, boxes, or construction materials to increase your working height on a scaffold platform. That is a dangerous practice. So ladders on scaffolds, other than those positioned for access to the scaffolds, are generally not permitted except under certain circumstances. Ladders must not be used to gain extra height on a scaffold platform except on large area scaffolds that meet certain strict criteria. Ladders on large area scaffolds must be secured against sideways movement if they are placed against another structure, such as a building wall. Large area platforms for ladders must be secured to the scaffold to prevent platforms from moving. If possible, the ladder leg should be placed on on one plank of a large area scaffold to prevent the ladder from destabilizing and secured to the platform to prevent it from slipping off. As we discussed earlier, it is an unsafe practice to improvise and stand on boxes, barrels, ladders, stacks of materials, or other items to increase surface height when you are on a scaffold platform. So here are some key points to remember from this training session on scaffolds and construction. Falls off the scaffold by workers because of inadequate or missing guardrails and planking are leading cause of disabling injuries and even death. Scaffolds with platforms at 6 feet or higher above a lower level or at any height above dangerous equipment must be guardrailed or have personal fall arrest systems, or both in some cases. Any scaffold must be able to support its own weight plus 4 times the maximum intended load, never overloading the scaffold or you risk collapse. Safety best measures to prevent falling object hazards include barricades below fall hazard zones, platform toe boards with screens, and catch platforms above workers at lower levels. It is a good safe best practice to keep any part of the scaffold at least 10 feet away from a power line. Ladders on scaffolds other than those positioned for access to scaffolds are generally not permitted except on large area scaffolds that meet certain criteria. This concludes the training session on scaffolds and construction. Please be sure to go back and review any information that is not completely clear. All right, so that was a lot of stuff there, guys. When we're erecting scaffold on a job site, just remember you need all the components. You need guardrails, you need toe boards, mid rails, top rails. Any working platform that you guys are on has to be fully decked. You have to be set on a firm level surface, and you need to have the required ties if necessary. So any questions on that? If you're trying to set up some scaffold, make sure that you're getting a competent person to okay those things. So that's going to be your superintendent. That's going to be me. A lot of you guys are scaffold erection trained, so those are you guys too. You'd be considered a competent person. All right, so thanks a lot. Be safe. Bye-bye. And we'll see you next week.